Out here, the mountains don't care how tough you think you are. The rivers don't slow down just because you're tired. And the wilderness, well, it has a way of humbling even the best of us. I'm Frazer Rivers, and this is where the real stories happen. Stories of grit, determination, and the kind of moments that stay with you long after the hunt is over. Gramps' last hunt. There comes a point in life when you realize you just can't do things the way you did in your 20s. The pack feels heavier, the mountains seem steeper, and the trek back always feels twice as long. So when John, who I like to call Gramps, called me up to tell me he had drawn the coveted LEH Grizzly tag for Revelstoke, British Columbia, I didn't hesitate. He was in his 60s, I was nearly 30 years younger, and he probably figured I'd make a good pack mule. But I knew this was more than just a hunt. It might be his last real shot at a grizzly in this part of the province.
The search begins.
We started scouting in late April. Since I only worked weekends, John would pick me up Mondays and drop me off Fridays. Being just a couple hours from Revelstoke, we had plenty of time to explore. But as we searched the lower elevations where spring greenery was emerging, all we found were black bears, no grizzlies in sight. Undeterred, we pushed into the high Rockies, riding our quads over snowslides and glassing green slopes where the snow had melted away. We hiked up into feeder valleys, crossed icy creeks, and scanned every patch of green in the snow-covered wilderness. Still, nothing. Weeks passed in much the same way. Miles of rugged terrain, endless scouting, but no grizzlies. It was strange. Just a few years ago, I had been in the same area and spotted 18 grizzlies in 1 week. This time, the hunting gods seemed to be toying with us. But even without a grizzly sighting, the wilderness was breathtaking. We saw mountain goats high on the cliffs, moose and elk in the river valleys, and plenty of black bears. One day, while scouting separate areas, I stumbled upon an old graveyard. The headstones marked the resting places of young adults and children, most born in the late 1800s and gone before their 25th birthday. Life back then must have been incredibly harsh. It made me appreciate how easy we have it today.
A change in fortune.
By late May, we had been at it for 4 weeks and had seen only one grizzly, too far away to go after. John, ever determined, wasn't ready to quit. I knew that if we got a grizzly after all this effort, it would mean the world to him. There was a remote valley we had explored earlier, and we decided to give it one last shot. 13 miles in on the quads, 5 snowslides crossed, a small creek forded, and another 4 miles hiked on foot. Finally, we reached the upper valley. And there he was. A grizzly. We moved into position to get a better look, but before we could make a decision, another bear appeared. A big boar. He was closing in on the first grizzly, which we quickly realized was his mate. Now things were getting interesting. John had set his limit at 300 yards, no exceptions. The bears were just out of range, and the terrain was too thick for a stalk. So we waited, hidden among towering cedars. Then a sound to my left caught my attention. I crept out, video camera in hand, and there, just 40 yards away, stood a cow moose with 2 newborn calves. It was a rare and humbling sight. We watched quietly, but as the evening crept in, the grizzlies moved higher up the mountain, and the moose began to grow uneasy with our presence. We decided to leave them be and return in the morning. The moment of truth. As we continued hiking, we spotted another grizzly, a small one, not worth pursuing. We kept moving. The valley narrowed, and we found ourselves nearly at the back, standing at 4,000 feet, with a glacier towering 9,000 feet above. Snow patches dotted the mountainside, but amidst them, another large boar was feeding. The day was fading fast, so we made our plan to return at first light. As we made our way back down, I was soaking in the beauty of the mountains, the crisp evening air, and the thrill of finally finding grizzlies. Then suddenly, John dropped to one knee, rifle up. My heart pounded. Had the cow moose charged us? I darted behind him, synced video camera ready. What a way to go, getting trampled by a moose in grizzly country. But then I saw it. The cow moose stood her ground, ears pinned back, her wobbly-legged calves tucked beneath her, and not 25 yards away, a massive blonde boar grizzly was closing in, ready to make a meal of them. John fired. The bear dropped, hit the snow, and lay still, but only for a moment. Then he was up, running toward the river. John fired again, and the grizzly collapsed in the alders at the water's edge. Amazingly, through the entire ordeal, the cow moose and her calves hadn't moved an inch. When we approached the bear, John was grinning ear to ear. He had done it. A stunning mountain grizzly. Long white claws, a broad blonde head, and a flawless hide. It was nearly dark, so we decided to return in the morning for pictures and the long job of skinning and packing him out. A hunt to remember. That night, we could hardly believe what had happened. After weeks of nothing, we had seen 5 grizzlies in one day, and John had taken one just moments before it would have killed a moose calf. The next morning, we hiked back in. The cow moose and her calves were still there, right where we had left them. In the golden morning light, we captured some beautiful photos and began the long process of skinning the bear. The moose wandered nearby, eventually bedding down as if we weren't even there. With one final look at our moose companions, we packed up and made our way back to the quads. John, Gramps, was still grinning from ear to ear, and I knew this hunt would stay with him forever. Now would be a great time for a refreshment as we paused between stories. The first black bear. I started bow hunting black bears years ago, and ever since, I've been hooked on the sheer thrill of it. There's something about the danger, about getting up close to a predator that's usually the one doing the stalking. The adrenaline rush is unmatched. That's why I prefer to hunt them on foot, spot and stalk, just like chasing mule deer. A good friend introduced me to this method back in 1996, connecting me with Westside Guide Outfitters. Since then, I've returned for 4 more black bear hunts with Larry Ward, even taking a trophy grizzly with him in '99. Dad always loved hearing my bear stories, especially the close calls. To him, getting within 50 yards of a bear was already too close. He'd often joke, "You'll never catch me doing that." But for Christmas in 2002, my wife and I gave him a surprise. A guided black bear hunt with Larry. He was shocked but excited. By April 2003, Dad and I were en route to British Columbia with our good friends Sam and Dean Winchester, brothers from our hometown. Sam and I had hunted black bears before, but this time we wanted to share the experience. We landed in Port Hardy late in the afternoon, and Dad was unusually quiet. When I asked if he was all right, he hesitated before asking, "You did say the guide carries a backup gun, right?" I laughed, thinking he was joking, until he asked again, this time looking for reassurance. That night, we stayed in a cozy resort before heading to Port McNeill at first light, where we met Dale and his 60-foot converted fishing boat, a floating hunting lodge. For the next week, we'd be cruising breathtaking ocean channels, glassing for bears, and indulging in Dale's 5-star cooking. Not long after setting sail, we spotted our first bear at dusk. It was too late for a stalk, so we dropped anchor and settled in for the night. The next morning, we passed on several smaller bears before spotting a big one near the shoreline, feasting on seaweed. It seemed like an easy stalk over the large boulders lining the beach. Dad, Sam, and I took a skiff downwind and beached about 300 yards away. The bear was tucked into a small cove, out of sight, and if he stayed put, we could creep within 40 to 50 yards before seeing him. But the bear had other plans. Just as we reached the crest of the cove, we were stunned to find him walking straight toward us. Within seconds, he'd be right on top of us. Dad quickly got to his knees, knocked an arrow, and readied himself. I scrambled to get the camera rolling just as the bear's ears crested the horizon, less than 10 yards away. Dad drew his bow, lining up a perfect shot, but hesitated. The bear, still unaware of us, kept coming. At 6 or 7 yards, it finally spotted Dad and froze. For what felt like an eternity, they locked eyes. Dad at full draw, the jet black bear staring him down. Then at last, the arrow flew, but Dad missed. The bear vanished into the thick timber, leaving Dad looking as if he'd seen a ghost. After a moment of silence, I asked what happened. He shook his head and said, "I guess I missed." Sam and I burst out laughing, and after a moment, Dad chuckled too. Another unforgettable memory. A day or so later, Dean was up. We watched from the boat as he crept to within 15 yards of a bear and drew his bow. He'd been shooting perfectly in practice, but in the heat of the moment, his arrow clattered against the rocks, another clean miss. When he returned, we asked what happened. His answer? I missed two. That was enough to keep us laughing for hours. Sam and I had agreed not to hunt until Dad and Dean got their first archery bears, so Dad was back up at first light. This time, we found a bear in a protected cove. We stalked to 60 yards but couldn't get closer without spooking it. Dad wisely waited, letting the bear move naturally. When it finally gave him a perfect 22-yard shot, he let the arrow fly, this time hitting dead center. The bear bolted, but only made it 10 yards before piling up. I shouted, "Great first bear, Dad." It was a moment I'll never forget. Dean followed with a textbook stalk, making a flawless 20-yard shot on his bear. It dropped within moments. When my turn finally came, my shot was good, but the bear turned at the last second, and I only hit one lung. We decided to track it in the morning, but as we stood in the dark, flashlight scanning for blood, a crash in the brush sent my adrenaline surging. The wounded bear was on us. Instinct took over. I fired 3 more arrows before I could even process what was happening. Another close call, but the bear was mine. On the second to last day, Sam wrapped up our adventure with a perfect 40-yard shot, dropping his bear in its tracks. 4 hunters, 4 bears, and stories we'd be telling for the rest of our lives. Thanks for being a part of the adventure with me, Frazer Rivers. Stay tuned for more thrilling hunting stories next time.